1 Samuel chapter 21. It's just 15 verses. This is pretty interesting stuff right here. Not sure why I'm in the book of Isaiah. 1 Samuel chapter 21. Let me begin by kind of giving you this introduction. As you know, over the last several chapters of our study thus far, the tension between Saul and David had been building to where Saul no longer is bashful about his intentions about David. In fact, he's very open about his intentions about David. And what is that intention? Wants him dead, okay? Whether Saul does it himself or he gets somebody else to do it, it doesn't matter. He wants David dead. Now, why does he want David dead? He's insanely jealous. What does he have to be jealous about? Huh? Well, I think that's part of that plays a role, right? But I think even bigger than that, he's upset that he has found more favor in the eyes of the people than Saul has, right? There's a jealousy thing there because, hey, they're singing. You'll remember, and this is going to come up again in our text tonight, that after David killed Goliath, the women began to dance and to sing, and here's what they sang. Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s. And by the way, that's going to come up again tonight in our text, right? Verse 11. You'll see it. So this is a song not just sung in Gibeah, not just a song sung in Jerusalem, but it's a song sung in Gath, which was the hometown of Goliath. It's gotten all the way back to the enemies of God and the enemies of David and to Israel, right? And so what do you think David's going to do? What if you knew somebody's going to kill you and they're going to stop at nothing at finding you, what are you going to do? You're going to hide. You're going to flee. So really, if you want to write this in your notes somewhere, the rest of the book of 1 Samuel, David is on the run. There used to be a rock song called Man on the Run, if y'all remember that. I'll start singing it. It's already stuck in my head. But David is on the run, and for the rest of these chapters, the book of 1 Samuel, he will be on the run, hiding out in caves. Saul gets close to him one time. There's a time where he has opportunity, at least twice, to kill Saul. But David declares, I shall not touch God's anointed. And so David has some scruples about him, if you will. He has some integrity about him. I mean, I don't know about you. If I knew that it was my life or somebody else's, right? I mean, our flesh would say, well, if it's going to be one of us, it's not going to be me, right? It's going to be you. But David doesn't look at it that way. He's looking at it through the lens of God. So, if you remember, last week when we talked about the relationship that Jonathan had with David, there was a plan that Jonathan had put in place. Remember that? It had something to do with arrows. You know, Jonathan wasn't completely convinced that his dad was going to still have anger and disdain for David, and so he went and talked to his dad about David. You know, why are you upset at him? Why do you want him dead? You know, he's not done anything wrong. And Saul didn't really ever explain it, right? He basically just said, you know what? If anybody should be mad, it should be you, right? And so he told him, he said, look, if everything's good, I'm going to take an arrow and I'm going to fire basically 3 shots to the left or the right of you, right? And I'll have my servant come out there and retrieve the arrows. This will be, if he goes wide of you, then you'll know that everything's good and you're safe to come back. But if I fire my arrows beyond you, and you see the servant go beyond you, David, it might be a good idea to get out of town, right? So what did he do? He shot the arrows what? Beyond him, right? And so chapter 21 begins David's fleeing from Saul because he's trying to save his life. Now, in this chapter, this specific chapter, I told you the rest of the book of, there's 31 chapters, the book of 1 Samuel. So after tonight, we'll have 10 more to go, okay? Probably take us through at least the end of the year, maybe into the first part of next year before we complete it. But beginning in chapter 21, David stops off at two places. He's going to stop off at a place known as Nob, N-O-B, and he's going to stop off at Gath. Now, does the city called Gath ring a bell to you? That's right. Gath is the hometown of Goliath. And when we get there, you're going to think, my, what is David doing in Philistine territory? And we'll talk about that when we get to it, okay? Well, let's look at, I think there's some lessons that we can learn from these two stops. So let me do this. Let me read verses 1 through 9, and let's look at David's stop at Nob, and I'll give you that blank in just a moment. You just follow along with me. This is chapter 21, 1 Samuel, beginning in verse 1. Here's what it says. Now, again, David's on the run. Now, David came to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest. Okay, Ahimelech was the high priest. And Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said, "Why are you alone and no one is with you?" Well, David is not completely alone. He's got a posse with him. You know, he's got a group of men who fully support him, right? But Ahimelech he's got a spirit of discernment about him. He can tell there's something not right here, right? And so he asked David some questions. Why are you alone and no one is with you? And notice what David does in verse 2. So David said to Ahimelech, the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business," he's talking about Saul, "and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you, or what I have commanded you, and I have directed my young men to such and such a place.'" Is he telling the truth? Let me say that again. Is he telling the truth? He is not. Verse 3. "Now therefore, what have you on hand?" So he basically goes to Ahimelech, and he's going to request two things. He's going to request bread, and he's going to request some weaponry. Okay, and there's a reason for that. So in verse 3, he says, "Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found." And notice this. The Bible says in verse 4, "And the priest answered David and said, 'There is no common bread on hand.'" In other words, I don't just have normal table bread on hand. He does have bread, but it's not common bread. He says, "But there is holy bread. If the young men have at least kept them," he says, "if the young men have at least kept themselves from women." And David answered the priest and said to him, "Truly, women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in effect common, and even though it was consecrated in vessels this day." So what does the priest do? The priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread, which had been taken from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man on the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, okay? And his name was, circle that name. This will not be the last time we hear about this cat. Doeg, an Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. And David said to Ahimelech, "Is there not here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." He said, I got in a hurry and I went off and left my weaponry. So the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, in whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is no other except that one here." And what do you think David's going to do? David said, "There's none like it. Give it to me." Okay? Well, let's just pause right there. Let's begin with this. What can we ascertain from David's stop at Nob? Well, it begins with David deceiving the high priest. It begins with David deceiving the high priest. I mean, think about it. First, David comes to Nob, which was located, by the way, just north of Jerusalem and just south of Gibeah. Now, Gibeah, you say, what's the significance of that? That's the place where Saul is reigning from, okay? That would be Saul's main abode. And so here at Nob, David pays a visit to the high priest, but unfortunately, he ends up deceiving the high priest while he is there. And by the way, it's going to result in some dire consequences. Dire consequences for Saul and dire consequences for Ahimelech, okay? And so let's just talk about this for a little bit. First of all, let's talk about the problem with lying. The problem with lying. David's first stop, again, is at the city of Nob, where he goes to Elimelech, the high priest, and he's there for basically two reasons, or one main reason. He's wanting some supplies. And what are those two things that he asked for? Bread and some kind of weapons, right? He needed food, he needed weapons. Now, I find it interesting that verse 1 tells us this. Now, David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid when he met David. What do you think that he was fearful of? Maybe. I mean, is he aware of what's going on with Saul? Yeah, I think so. Saul is, again, he's not been very bashful about telling about his plans, right? But David flat out lies to the high priest. Now, we can ask and we can think, you know what? Why does he lie? Why didn't he just tell him the truth? He asked him basically two questions. Why are you alone? Why is not anyone with you? And instead of telling him the truth, what does he do? He lies. He tells Elimelech that he's on a special assignment from the king, and he asks bread for him and his men, and he asks for weapons. Now, in our study of the book of 1 Samuel, is this the first time we've come across this issue of lying? Can you think of some others that have lied up to this point? Saul has lied, absolutely, right? He was asked point blank, do you want David dead early on? No, I'm done trying to kill him. Everything's good. What about Michal, right? This was the wife of David. She lied for what purpose? To protect David, right? Has anybody else lied? Jonathan lied. He sure did. Jonathan lied. And now who else has lied? David has now lied. Now, we talked about this pretty great extent a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about situational ethics. Anybody remember that discussion? Is it right to lie if it means saving somebody's life? And I think you're going to get varying opinions of that. But here's the thing you need to understand. This is not the only time in Scripture where we see lying being used. Abram did it a couple of times, right? Back in the book of Exodus, we see it being done by the midwives, right? Remember that? Jacob was the ultimate deceiver, right? He lied to his father. His mom played a role in that as well. But here's the thing you need to understand. I've said this many, many times, that although the Bible records something, doesn't mean that the Bible condones that thing. Not everything that is recorded in the Bible does the Bible condone. In other words, you have these records of these lies being told, but this is not the Bible thinking, okay, it's okay to lie. Lying is still what? Lying. And lying is wrong. Even if we say, well, I think when you put lying on the scale and the saving of a life, you know, the lying outweighs the saving the saving of the life rather outweighs the lie. Okay, the point being is lie is a lie is a lie is a lie, and oftentimes if you've not, again, I was a liar growing up. Anybody else told lies besides me growing up? My mom went to a grave. When I get to heaven, I'm gonna have to confess it to her. When she died, my little brother and was being a pain in my rear, and I chased him outside, and then he went back inside, and I had a golf club in my hand because I was getting ready to beat him with a golf club. Okay, and now we're teenagers at this point, and he closes the door and he locks it, and so I began to tap on the glass with that golf club, and I said, you better open this door, and I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. What happened to that glass? It broke. And what do you think I did? My mom hears the glass shatter. She comes running, and I quickly toss the golf club inside the window, and my little brother picks it up, and to this day, my mother, well, if she's looking down, maybe she knows now, but yeah, I was a bad boy, a bad boy. No, she didn't. No, she didn't deduce that. She just knew that she was mad that glass in a door was broken and it was going to cost money. Okay? So she got her pound of flesh out of him. I'll be honest with you, I didn't even feel a little bit bad about it. I do today because I wasn't saved at the time. We've all told lies, but the fact of the matter is a lie is a lie is a lie. And there are consequences for lying. And in this case, David is going to put, and honestly, he's going to put Ahimelech into grave danger. Now, you say, well, what difference would it make? Because if he would have told Ahimelech the truth, that he was fleeing because Saul was pursuing him, well, then guess what? Ahimelech has the choice of whether he's going to help David or not. I mean, if he helps David and that cost him his own life, then, hey, that was the choice that you made. But now that you've told this lie to Ahimelech and he's got no choice but to believe you, that this lie that you're telling him, now you've not only put yourself in danger, but you've also put him in danger. Now the big question arises, why did David lie to him? We don't know specifically. It could have been, I think, a variety of reasons. It could have been that he didn't want Ahimelech to get involved. Okay? There's a dispute between me and Saul, or rephrase that. It's a one-sided dispute, right? And if I tell you the truth, it might put your life in danger, and maybe David is looking out for Ahimelech and trying to keep him from getting involved, right? It could very well be that this is also an attempt of David to protect his own skin, right? Or he may feel like, hey, it's a need-to-know basis, and in this stage, you don't need to know. No, he's a Jew. Nob is in Jewish territory. Yeah. Yeah, he's a high priest, right?
And he didn't know whether the priest was going to send a runner back to Saul and say, hey, guess who I got here?
All of those things could have played in, right? So and that could have been where he was trying to protect his own skin. But honestly, I think in my heart of hearts that he's trying to protect Ahimelech and keeping him from getting involved, okay? This is a need-to-know situation, and you really, really, really don't want to know, right? Because it could put you in danger, okay? Now, here's the main point. Here's the main point of me telling you about the problem with lying. And I want you to write this down somewhere. That lying demonstrates a lack of trust in God. Lying demonstrates a lack of trust in God. But it also had consequences because in this case, it creates more problems, even more problems down the road. And we're going to see that going forward. We won't see it tonight, but we'll see it in the next week. Any questions or thoughts up to this point? Well, look at verses 4, 5, and 6. We see not only the problem of lying, but we also see the reason for rules. The reason for rules. And when we talk about reason for rules, we're talking about the reason God gives us rules. Okay? And somewhere in your notes, I want you to write Leviticus chapter 24, verses 5 through 9. We're not going to look at it tonight, but I want you just to go back and refer to it. Leviticus chapter 24, verses 5 through 9, because this will be the background information as it relates to the holy bread. As you know, David asked, he said, do you have any bread? Can you spare 5 loaves? To which Elimelech tells him, I don't have any common bread. I don't have just your normal bread to be given out that anybody could eat. Okay, so I've got holy bread or showbread, if you remember. And what's significant about this showbread is that every Sabbath, the priest would set out 12 loaves before the Lord, okay, and he would put them in 2 rows of 6, okay? So what do you think the significance of these 12 loaves are? The 12 tribes of Israel. In fact, you go back to Leviticus 24, it talks about all of that, okay? So he does not have these any common bread. All he's got is showbread, but he's going to give David, and by the way, you think about this, the showbread or these special loaves, the holy bread, no one could eat that but the priest, and the priest could only eat it at certain times and in certain places. Okay? And so, but now David has told him, look, hey, we got in a hurry, we got away, we got without supplies, we don't really have anything to eat. And so what does Elimelech do? Does he turn him away? Does he say, well, I'm sorry, buddy, all we've got is this showbread, and you know, only priests are allowed to eat that. What does he do? He gives him the bread, this showbread, this holy bread. Why does he do that? But again, think about this. Again, this was bread that only the priests were allowed to eat.
David's a big deal.
Do you remember a time in the New Testament that Jesus addresses this very thing? In Matthew chapter 12, I believe it is, you remember on the Sabbath, Jesus and his disciples are walking, and the disciples pluck some grain, which was legally they could do that. You know, if you were walking through somebody's field, you can pluck grain, right? And it was almost like Barney Fife on a stakeout. The Philistines jump out and they go, aha, we caught you. The Pharisees, we caught you. You can't do that on the Sabbath. And Jesus referred to this particular story. I believe it's Matthew 12. Jesus referred to this exact story. He said, which is it? You know, was it right for Elimelech, the high priest, to give David this bread that was really only designed for the priest to eat? And what Jesus said was, yes, what Ahimelech did was right. You know why? Because he was trying to show kindness toward his fellow man. God set up these rules, okay? And Jesus gave the picture of, hey, did God create the man for the Sabbath or the Sabbath for the man? He created the man for the Sabbath. I mean, the Sabbath for the man. I'm sorry, get it right. You had it right, Barbara. Right? And they were, well, you can't be doing these things on the Sabbath. Well, if you have a need, you do what you got to do. Right? And that's the whole thing. So if you want to say reason for the rules, you can sum up the reasons that God gave these rules for 2 reasons. Let me give them to you. To love God, to honor God, if you will. Okay, that's the purpose of the showbread or the holy bread. But also give opportunity to show mercy and kindness to our fellow man. And are we showing love toward God when we show kindness toward our fellow man? Of course we are. These rules are not regimented to keep us in the slave market. A lot of times, well, I don't want to be bound by this restrictive God. God gave us boundaries and freedom within those boundaries, again, to love him and to show kindness and mercy to our fellow man. And that's what we're to be about. And again, Jesus did not condemn Elimelech for this. In fact, he said Elimelech did the right thing. Now look at verse 7, 8, 9. Again, we're under this heading. David's still in Nob, okay? He sees the high priest. He lies to the high priest. He tells the high priest that he's on a special assignment from Saul. Again, he's lying out of his teeth. Why is he doing that? Is he trying to save his own skin? Is he trying to keep Elimelech from getting involved? But his lies are going to have consequences. You come to verses 7, 8, and 9. He asks now for weaponry. He said, now a certain man. By the way, I had you circle that word, that name, Doeg. He is one of King Saul's cronies. He just happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. Okay? Look what happens. Now, a certain man of the here's why I said this is why it's going to become a problematic for David and Elimelech. Otherwise, Saul would not have been any wiser. How's Saul going to find out about this? This cat right here. Now, a certain man of the servant of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. And his name was Doeg. You ever come across a name like that and just thinking, man, I can just tell right away this is not a good guy. The name just kind of gives it away, doesn't it? Doeg, the Edomite. When you think of Doeg, the Edomite, does it give you warm, fuzzy feelings? Doesn't do anything for me, right? In fact, I'm beginning to think right away, this guy is not going to be good, and he's not. Okay? He's the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. You're thinking, oh boy. Verse 8. And David said to Elimelech, is there not here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. Is this a truth or a lie? This is also a lie, right? And then what does the priest do? The priest steps up just as he's provided food. Verse 9, so the priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take it, you can have it, basically. For there is no other exception that one here. And David said, there is none like it, give it to me. So we see the problem of lying, right? We see the reason for the rules, and the reasons for the rules, okay, God gave us these standards, if you will, was for love and mercy, love toward God and mercy toward others. Now we see dealing with danger. Again, we're introduced to this guy by the name of Doeg, the Edomite, and right away you just got in your heart of hearts, this guy just means trouble. He's a menacing figure, and it turns out he is an informant, if you will, to Saul's regime. His presence there at Nob will have devastating consequences for both David and Elimelech. Now, David not only asked for food, but he also asked for weapons. And what did he give him? He gave him Goliath's sword, which David does what with? He gladly accepts. Now, we already know, because I've already told you this, where's he going from Nob? So think about this. David is enemy number one to the Philistines. He's going to try to go incognito, but he goes prancing into Gath carrying Goliath's sword. David, right? Well, you can look at it this way. It beats not having anything, right? He's much older now, much bigger man now. Here's the thing I want you to think about. I got to thinking about this today, and I just couldn't get it out of my mind. The Bible, or Scripture, I should say, uses symbolism to describe itself. What are the two symbols the Bible uses to describe, the Scripture uses to describe the Bible? What are the two things that David asked for? The bread of life and the sword of the Spirit. Isn't that interesting? That's just me. That's free. I'm not going to charge you for that tonight. I just thought that was pretty interesting. That David asked for bread and a sword. When you think about symbolism, both the bread and a sword represent the Bible. Yes, sir. It could be, but here's the problem. Where he's going, there are not just one big giant. There's thousands of them. Okay? Yeah. let's just pick it up, okay? Any questions about the fact that we saw David at Nob and him deceiving the high priest? You good? Now we see David going to Gath. And again, I ask you, what does Gath stand out to you? It should. Let me read verses 10 through 15. Then David arose and fled that day from before Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Let me pause right here. Why in the world would you go there? I think I've got an answer. Where do you think would be the last place that Saul would go to look for David? The land of the Philistines. Because after all, Saul is a scaredy cat of the Philistines. He had David fight all of those battles. Remember that? So David is probably thinking the reason why he goes there, hey, I'm going to be safe here. He's probably not thinking in the moment that he's going to come face to face with some enemies. He thinks I'm going in there incognito. Nobody's going to recognize me. You know, years have gone by. I've grown. I've got a beard now. I'm not this childlike face now. I've got a beard. They're not going to recognize me. But they recognize him right off the bat. Watch this. And David arose and fled to that day from before Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David?" Now notice how they refer to him. The king of the land. Watch this. Did they not sing of him to one another in dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And what do? They capture David and they take him to the king of Gath, a guy by the name of Achish. Now watch what it says about David. It says, and David took these words to heart. After that is, can you imagine? Hey, we know you. We know you. We recognize you. What do you think David's going to think? Do you think his heart just sank and maybe his stomach went up to his throat? In fact, it says this in verse 11, and the servants of, or verse 12, now David took these words to heart, and watch this, was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. I think I would be too. Verse 13, what does he do? I'll give David credit. Here's a fast thinker on his feet. Verse 13, so he changed his behavior from before them, and pretended madness in their hands, scratched at the doors of the gates, and let his saliva fall down on his beard. I like that. What translation do you have? I like that. Disguised his sanity. If you think verse 12 is funny, or you think verse 13 is funny, verse 14 and 15 are even funnier. You say, why do you say that? Verse 14 says, then Achish said, now think about this. They bring David, and he starts looking like he is completely out of his mind. I mean, I bet he was a sight to see. I mean, he's doing some weird things. He's scratching at the gate, and he's letting his saliva run down his beard. Can't you just see that, right? And Achish has got a look on this guy thinking, what did y'all just bring here? I love what he says. Love this. Then Achish said to his servants, look, see, the man is insane. Why have you brought him to me? And I love what verse 15 said. This is hilarious. Have I need of madmen, that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? Here's what I think he's saying. Why have you brought this lunatic into my presence? I've got enough of them already. Do I lack madmen? I just think that's hilarious. So, what does David do in this particular case? He leaves the city of Nob. He goes to Gath. Now, here's what you need to know about Gath. Gath was one of 5 main cities of the Philistines. And we're going to see all 5 of them before we get through 1 Samuel. Gath is one of 5 main cities of the Philistines. And again, whose hometown is it? It's Goliath's hometown. Now, again, you might already be thinking, why in the world would he go there? And again, I think he's thinking that, hey, they're not going to recognize me, and this is going to be the last place that Saul will think to find me. I think it really also shows just how desperate a man David is. You ever heard this phrase? Desperate times call for what? Desperate measures. And I think that's exactly what's going on in the life of David. Well, what can we glean? What's some application that we can glean from this experience of David in Gath before King Achish? Well, first of all, I think it's a reminder that yours and my actions follow us. Yours and my actions follow us. We learn, again, a number of things from David here. One of those is your actions follow you. The Philistines had not forgotten what David had done. What did he do? He killed their champion. He thinks he's going in there incognito. And immediately what happens? They recognize him. And not only that, again, did you pick up on verse 11? The very song that caused Saul to go into his insane jealousy is the same song that they were being reminded of there in Gath, these Philistines. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And do you also remember what David is carrying? Here's the point. I'm going to ask you a silly question. It's a rhetorical question. How many of you have a past? All of you do, or you wouldn't be here. But here's the question. How many of you have some things in your past that you're not proud of? I got a lot of things in my past that I look back on in absolute shame, thinking, how in the world did you ever do that? No, I'm not talking about going to prison. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't rob a bank or anything like that. But I got some things in my past that I'm deeply, deeply ashamed of, as I'm sure that you are. And it seems to me, I don't know about you, when we think about David being on the run here, it seems like the harder we run to get away from our past, what ends up catching up with us? It's our past. Let me give you a word of encouragement. Y'all want some encouragement? Y'all want some discouragement or some encouragement? Let me give you some encouragement. I'm glad you're gonna be grateful that you came. Here's the thing. When we think about every one of us having a past, all of us admitted that we have some things in our past that we're not proud of. Here's the thing you need to learn. We are who we are. What we've done, we've done. As my stepdad told me more than once, Bill, you cannot go back and unscramble the egg. We are who we are, and we've done what we've done, and nothing can really change that. But here's the good news. Here's the good news. Christianity tells us that Jesus not only died for our sins, he also came to redeem our past. Because here's the thing you need to remember. Guilt is not from God. If you have confessed that and given it over to God, you need to let it go too. Nothing you can do can go back and change what you've done in the past. But it's all under the blood. All of our mistakes, all of our regrets are all covered under the blood. Did I give you all that blank? Yeah. Your actions follow you. But not only that, we also see David taking desperate measures. David taking desperate measures. Because what does he do when he is taken before King Achish? He acts nuts. He pretends to be out of his mind. And guess what? It works. After Achish sends him away, I wonder if David thought, I can't believe that worked. Or I think I heard someone over here go, phew. Because David's life was on the line. David imitates being insane, right? And I love what Achish says in verse 15. Why did you bring him here? I don't need any more crazy people. I've got enough of them right here. And by the way, I want us to do this. I want you to hold your finger there because this is an incident. You know, David wrote many of the Psalms. And I want you to go to Psalm 34. Psalm 34. Again, this one's free too. And I don't know when you read the Psalms, do you ever look at the headings or the subtitles? You ought to, because then you get an idea of why and who wrote and why they wrote it. If you look at Psalm 34, look at the subtitle there, or the heading there. It says, a psalm of David when he pretended madness before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. Okay? Now, I want you to lock in on verses 3 and 4. Let me just go ahead and read verse 1 through 4, just for context purposes. Verse 1 says, and I will bless the Lord at all times. Now, David's thinking about this, and he's writing this psalm. Again, the psalms were hymns. They were part of the Hebrew hymn book. He says, I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall be continually where? And then he says in verse 2, he says, my soul shall make its boast in the Lord, and the humble shall hear of it and be glad. But then look at verse 3 and 4. Read it with me out loud, please. He says, oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. He says, I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and he delivered me from what? How many of my fears? All my fears. And I believe that here is the application for you and I, that even though when we make mistakes, we can know that God is with us. Had David really blown it? He lied. I mean, think about it. He didn't just lie. He lied to the preacher. The high preacher. The big dog. But yet, what did God do? He went into enemy territory, really put his life on the line, even probably more dangerous before the Philistines than he would ever have been to Saul. Because Saul was just one enemy. In the city of Gath, there were literally thousands and thousands of Philistines that lived there. Now he's walked into the heart of enemy territory. But what has God done for him there? God has spared him. God has delivered him. And the same God who moved and worked in David's life is the same God that you and I serve today. That'd be a good place for an amen. That God is always with us. God doesn't, I wrote this in my own notes, God doesn't abandon us in hard times and just let us try to figure it out. But rather, he's looking after us, and he's guiding us and steering us to do what is needful and helpful.
As far as David going where he went, he wouldn't raise the sword against Saul, but he didn't mind killing the Philistines.
That's right. They were the enemies of God. Yeah.
Even though he was an enemy, don't you think there was a warring people? Don't you think they respected him and had fear of David? And knew what a great warrior he was.
Yeah, but I think that they felt, you know what? The odds in our favor.
They kind of outnumbered him.
Yeah, we outnumbered him.
I think that's why they took him to Achish. Hey, what do you want us to do to him? Huh?
They knew he had God on his side.
Yeah. 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 Hey, y'all took Goliath's head as a trophy. We're not told as it relates to Gath, okay? But they were with him. I'm sure maybe they spread out. Maybe he'd sent spies out to see, hey, make sure we see anybody coming. We're not told specifically. They're obviously not with him here, because if they are, we're not told that they are. I'm going to presume that they are not with him here, that maybe they are doing some scouting of their own. Exactly. Are they going to be accepting or are they going to be hostile? Yeah. Yeah.
They could fade back into the countryside a lot easier than David.
Oh, absolutely.
Not all of them, but
Yeah.
some of them could, probably the majority of them could just fade back in to the countryside and everything would be fine.
Right. Absolutely. The Roman numeral two? David playing the madman. Sorry about that. I don't think I told any of y'all that. He's role playing. Yeah, he's role playing there. Yeah. Okay. Okay. 400. Okay. That's a lot. Yeah, you can't travel with an entourage that large and not be noticed. Yeah. Now, the whole point being is why we have this story is to prove the faithfulness of God. Has God changed his mind about David being king? No, had not. Okay. Any other thoughts? Those of you watching online, we bid you adieu. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Let me give you a couple of quick